Hi everyone, I'm Shelley and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another Question the Narrative video, and this one is on the mansions of the Gilded Age and the world's fairs. I actually came up with this idea in a very odd way. I was driving in my car listening to my Spotify playlist, and being the very cheap person that I am, I get the free Spotify, so there are ads. And one of the ads was trying to get people to come and visit Rhode Island. And at the end of the ad, they mentioned the Gilded Age mansions of Rhode Island. And so I thought to myself, that's something that I think I need to look into. So when I got home, I typed in Gilded Age mansions of Rhode Island, and wow, I was floored. So let's just take a quick look at what the Gilded Age is. And I have to say that this has nothing to do with an apparent TV series called The Gilded Age. I didn't even know that that show existed because I don't pay attention to really shows or anything like that. So yeah, nothing to do with that. But let's just see what the Gilded Age is, because this is actually a time that I was never taught about in school. So in United States history, the Gilded Age was an era extending roughly from 1877 to 1896, which was sandwiched between the Reconstruction era and the Progressive era. I can't say that I've ever heard of the Progressive era either. But anyway, it was a time of rapid economic growth, especially in the northern and western United States, as American wages grew much higher than those in Europe, especially for skilled workers, and industrialization demanded an ever-increasing unskilled labor force. The period saw an influx of European immigrants. The rapid expansion of industrialization led to real wage growth of 60% between 1860 and 1890 and spread across the ever-increasing labor force. The average annual wage per industrial worker, including men, women, and children, rose from $380 in 1880 to $564 in 1890, a gain of 48%. Conversely, the Gilded Age was also an era of abject poverty and inequality as millions of immigrants, many from impoverished regions, poured into the United States, and the high concentration of wealth became more visible and contentious. So again, I know that Wikipedia isn't always very trustworthy, but it is usually a good place to get an idea of what the mainstream narrative tells us about a particular, maybe scientific theory or a specific time period. And so, yeah, so I clicked on this just to see what it had to say about the Gilded Age. And it does make sense that if this were indeed a time period of economic growth, there you would start to see a deepening and deepening. Is deepening the right word? A widening, that's the word I'm looking for. A widening gap between the elite, like the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts and so on, and then just the average working class. So you would definitely see, some disparities there. But what I have noticed when it comes to Rhode Island, at least, these mansions seem numerous. So when we tend to think of the quote elite, and I don't consider them to be elite. I call them that because they are like in the 1%, and they certainly consider themselves to be elite. I know that people hate when I call them that, but that's just how I categorize them because it's easier to have some name for a group. But anyway, and I'm usually it's a very small group of people that have that many resources, and the larger group is usually the poorer section, the poorer subgroup. Yet here we have this tiny little state of Rhode Island. So when I say tiny, I mean tiny. This is Rhode Island right here. So here's a map of the United States, and you can see the relative size of these states. And then you see this tiny little state of Rhode Island that is 1,214 square miles. And yet, in that tiny little state, there are multitudes of these Gilded Age mansions. And as I look at these, a lot of questions pop into my mind. And first of all, the average question that I've been asking so long is, How did they build these during this time? I know that they had more resources. I don't need anyone to tell me that they had more resources during this time. That's obvious. But if we are to go by what they tell us about this time period, they certainly would not have had the technology to build buildings of this intricate nature, no matter how much money they had. And I mean, look at the detail. And yeah, to me, these are not buildings that were built during the Gilded Age. These are buildings that were founded, possibly, well, I don't know if they were just found in the Gilded Age, but they were certainly inhabited during the Gilded Age. But I certainly don't believe that they were built during the Gilded Age, like we are being led to believe. Not with the conditions that they tell us were going on at that time, not with the technology, not with the transportation. Because, a lot of times we think about technology and we think, well, did they have the tools? Did they have the means to do that? Well, usually it's no, they did not. I think that was just a rendering. Usually it's no, they did not have the tools, but not only that, they didn't have the transportation. How would they have transported all of these materials to build these beautiful, lavish buildings? And I actually took it upon myself to look up what the technology is during this time and the transportation. Maybe not technology, it might have been tools. So as you can see, I just searched 19th century transportation, and this is what I came up with. We've got a steamboat. We've got the typical horse and carts. It said, I think it says public and private steam train, another steam train. But as you can see, it's still pretty primitive. And these trains obviously would not have been running right up to these mansions. So was it horse and carts that they used to transport all of these enormous heavy materials to build these buildings? I'm going to say that that's a ludicrous idea. It does not fit with what we see here. And again, I know that the people who owned these mansions had more money. But if we are to believe what they tell us about what the technology is at that time, we did not have, at the very least, the transportation in order to transport materials for buildings like this. I'm sorry. And the same goes with the World's Fairs. People get angry. Oh, well, no, the world it's temporary. The World's Fair buildings were temporary. Yes, some of them were. Some of them were permanent, and they are still standing today. And yet they also were built with this transportation. Now let's take a look at the technology of the industrial age. I looked up industrial age because I figured that is, like a close time period to the Gilded Age. And from what I am looking at, it still isn't very impressive. For that time period, yes, certainly, if these people are supposedly as primitive as we're being told that they were, okay, great. Do you really think they're lugging things like this around to these sites where these mansions were built? So as I'm looking through here, I just keep thinking to myself, okay, yeah, so the Industrial Revolution was a time of great advancements, but nowhere near what you would need to build things such as these Gilded Age mansions. And I'm also going to say nowhere near what you would need to build the World's Fairs. And so moving on to the World's Fairs, I just wanted to share with you this interesting comment that I got a while back, and I've actually been saving it in my gallery on my phone for quite a while, wanting to comment on it in one of my videos and haven't gotten around to it yet. But when I started doing this video on the Gilded Age mansions, I thought this is a perfect time to tie in these World Fairs, these World's Fairs buildings, because they are very similar in detail and difficulty as these Gilded Age mansions. So These thoughts just came to me. Maybe the pictures of the World's Fairs were actually photos of people who lived at the end of the millennial reign. That's the kind of things they did and just traveled around to see all the beautiful things people were creating in their free time. Then, when Satan was released, they locked up all those people in the asylums that remembered and took the children and re educated them. And yeah, so that certainly makes me think of the orphan trains and all of the lunatic asylums, which I just talked about in a recent video. As far as all the supposed people immigrating could just be a lie, and there were no records because the country was already populated with people. There would have been a mixture of people that followed God and some that would have gone along with their narrative. Probably a lot of them may have taken advantage of the Freemasonry. And I really do think that that's what it is. I think that these buildings were just taken over. They were already there. Sure, they might have been cleaned up. They might have been made a little bit more inhabitable, but I do not believe that they were built by these people who are driving around in horse and carts. I mean, for heaven's sakes, they tell us that they were throwing poop in the streets. Well, okay, then if they didn't have enough, I don't even know what word I'm looking for, enough intellectual capacity to come up with a better idea than throwing poop in the streets, they're going to come up with these beautiful mansions and also the World's Fair buildings. And I also have to go back to this point here where it says, as far as all the supposed people immigrating could just be a lie, and there were no records because the country was already populated with people. And that is something that I talked about, because in 1890, we know that there was a fire and all of the 1890 census records were burned in that fire. And then in 1897, there was a fire at Ellis Island. And if you know anything about immigration to the United States during that time period, that is where the immigrants had to go through, was through Ellis Island. And everyone who traveled through Ellis Island up through 1897, their records were also lost in a fire. So there are a lot of really shady narratives. So let's just look at some photos that I pulled up of some of the World's Fair buildings. And yes, this was during the time of horse and carts and steam trains and poop in the streets. Yeah, let's take a look at this. And also during the time of the Gilded Age mansions that were supposedly built. So here we have this beautiful building that was, World's Fair. Would this, I can't tell in the, see, no, it doesn't really. I was hoping to make it a little bit bigger. I don't think this is a crystal palace, but it certainly looks over here like this might have been some sort of glass ceiling. I was thinking it could be a greenhouse or something, but regardless. Horse and carts, poop in the streets. I don't know about that. I mean, look at this. I'm going to show you a comparison in a minute of the World's Fairs and the fairs of today. And I'm hoping that some of you, I'm sure that most of you who are watching this, will see that something's up. There is something not right. There is too much of a disparity. I mean, look at the people. They're exquisitely dressed. There's no trash on the ground. You go to a fair nowadays, there's trash everywhere. And I'm sorry, but people, they just look a mess. And I'm guilty of the same thing a lot of times. I might run to the store at the last minute and just didn't bother, like making myself look presentable. These people were impeccable. And the buildings, exquisite, absolutely exquisite. Look at this. This doesn't look like a World's Fair. It looks like something straight out of a fairy tale, in my opinion. And to me, the whole idea of these pictures being taken at the end of the millennial reign, and I'm on the fence about that. I'm going to say right now, I'm still very much on the fence about that. I go back and forth. I think it's definitely a possibility, but I am not 100% sold. But at the very least, this does seem like it was from not even just another time, because we obviously know that it was from another time. It almost seems like it was just an entirely different realm. Nothing like what we see. Look at this. Horse and carts? Again, where's the trash? There's no trash in the road or on the street. And this is something else that I want to point out too, is that a lot of times when I post photos of empty streets, people say, oh, well, during those time, it took a lot of time for the photos to be exposed and people would have had to hold really still in order to show up on the film. What about this? I really don't think that they got all these people to stand still for a lengthy amount of time so that they could expose them. So that is something else that just, it doesn't fit. It doesn't add up. And so, yes, I believe that all of these structures were already here. They were here. And yeah, the people were different too. So not only did they build these beautiful buildings, they dug lagoons, actual lagoons. I've seen photos of some of these lagoons actually with boats where they were taking people around. This is not just a World's Fair. At the very least, it's a showcasing of what they have found, what they have discovered. And I have to go back to the photo of right here. The sheer size of these structures compared to the people. And I'm going to keep repeating this because I really hope that you will understand this. Horses and carts were used to build these? To transport these materials? Who dug the lagoons? Who landscaped them? Yeah, you can tell me all that you want that the buildings for the World's Fairs were temporary. Those lagoons, those are real lagoons. They're not just like little ponds that you would see at a kiddie amusement park. Speaking of that, let's take a look at what a real fair would actually look like. This is a photo of the Kutztown Fair. I've actually been here already because I don't live very far from there. Obviously not at this time, I was not there. This was from the early 1900s. So not much later than those pictures were supposedly taken of the World's Fairs, at least the Chicago World's Fair. The Chicago World's Fair, let's see, that I know for sure it was the one with the lagoon. I just missed it. Okay, yes, so this is the Chicago World's Fair. It was in 1893. And here we have the Kutztown Fair in the early 1900s. I know it's not a World's Fair. I know it's just a county fair. But the discrepancies are too huge to ignore. There's trash on the ground. So for those of you who might have been thinking, oh, well, people in those days probably took better care of the earth. Well, no, that's not what it looks like here. This is certainly around the same time. There's trash all over the ground here. I am more likely to believe that this is an actual fair than this, with nothing on the ground. Do you even see trash cans anywhere? I'm just looking now. It's something that we would have to sit and study for quite a while, but yeah, I'm not even seeing trash cans anywhere. And so beyond that, here is another fair from 1905. And again, I realize that this is probably a poorer area, but here we have their transportation. And according to the narrative that we're told, it was the same transportation used by everyone. Do you think that these little things would have been pulling these gigantic pieces to put on these buildings of the World's Fairs, whether they were temporary or permanent? And I have had many builders comment and tell me, look, if those buildings, even if all of them were temporary, it would still have taken an extraordinary amount of manpower and time to get those done. And there is no way that it got done the way that they said. I have had people tell me that who actually do this for a living with the technology that we have nowadays, mind you. Here we are in the 21st century, and this is what our fairs look like nowadays. So we have gone from this for a fair to this and this. Colorful, yes. Exciting, yes, especially for the children. I am certainly not talking down these fairs. I know that they're a lot of fun. The sights, the sounds, the smells, yes, it's exciting. But it is a far cry from this. And this is 150 years later, approximately. And another thing that I want to point out is that at most fairs, what you are typically walking on is either grass or just concrete. There are not extravagant lagoons dug out. Or actually there was one World's Fair that I saw actually film footage, and there were moving sidewalks. So yeah, there was also electricity at these World's Fairs in the late 1800s. 1893 Chicago World's Fairs was lit up at night. And yes, I know that there was electricity at this time, but electricity for something of that size, how many square feet was the Chicago World's Fair? Was it or square? You know what? I'm going to look that up right now. Okay, so this right here tells us that there were 686 acres in the Chicago World's Fair. And even if every single building was not lit up at that time, a lot of it was. There you go. Completely lit up, 1893, with the Statue of Columbia right smack in the middle of the picture. I think that this should actually tell us a lot about this time. And I would have to say that now this could have been put in place afterwards, but the presence of all of these statues of gods and goddesses at these World's Fairs, to me, would say that it was not at the end of the millennial kingdom, because they would not have, had anything like that up in the time of Jesus's reign, although they could have definitely been put in place afterwards. But the fact is that what we're looking at with these World's Fairs, what we are looking at with these Gilded Age mansions, and then what we're looking at today, if we are truly progressing like they try to tell us that they are, then something is amiss. And I don't know. I'm troubled by the whole thing, to be quite honest. I'm troubled because I want to know what happened to us. How do we go from dignified and refined people, clean people, to what we see around us today? And to me, as much as the buildings are a huge sign of a reset, I think the people are an even bigger sign, because something catastrophic happened on the earth for sure. For sure. Something catastrophic happened to the buildings that we see mud flooded, but something catastrophic even more happened to humanity, because we are not anywhere near what we used to be. That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work, you can check out my Patreon page and leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.